Hey guys, welcome. Tonight we're going to get comfortable and drift back, it's way back, before gleaming skyscrapers and instant coffee, before paved roads, before soap was really a thing, before the revolutionary idea that maybe you shouldn't. Dump your chamber pot into the street. We're heading to the Middle Ages, so dim the lights. It's settled under your clean, comfortable blankets. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's float back to a time when just waking up in the morning was a minor victory. We're not going to be talking about knights in shining armor or the grand coronations of kings. No, tonight is about the quiet, grinding, and frankly miserable reality of everyday life for the average person. It was a world of damp clothes, questionable stews, and a life expectancy that would make a modern actuary weep. A time when the grandest ambition for most was simply to see next Tuesday. So relax, close your eyes, and let's explore the exquisite perils of just existing. In the medieval world, our story begins, as most days do, at sunrise. Except there's no gentle alarm, no soft light filtering through blinds. You're a peasant, let's call you. And you're waking up because the sun is streaming through the gaps in the Wattleland dub wall of your one-room house. Or maybe the rooster, which is likely sharing your living space. It's decided it's time for the whole world to know. The floor beneath you is just packed earth, cold and damp. You share a straw-stuffed mattress if you're lucky enough to have one with your entire family. And when I say family, I mean your spouse. Your 3 living children, you've had 6. But infant mortality is just a fact of life, and maybe an elderly parent who has somehow defied all odds to reach the ripe old age of 45. Oh, and as I mentioned, the animals. To protect them from thieves or predators, it was common to bring your precious livestock inside for the night. So that warmth you're feeling isn't just your loved ones. It's a pig or a couple of chickens. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and animal waste. It's the smell of home. Your first task of the day is to relieve yourself. There's no en-suite bathroom, of course. You'll either use a chamber pot, the contents of which will be unceremoniously tossed into the street or the nearby river, or you'll head to an outhouse if your dwelling is slightly more upscale. Then, a quick wash. This involves a basin of icy water, which you probably fetched from the village well or a stream the day before. You'll wash your hands and face, because even in the Middle Ages, people generally preferred not to have yesterdays. Grime on their face today, but a full bath? That was a rare luxury, maybe something for a special occasion. Soap, a simple concoction of animal fat and ash, was available, but not exactly a daily staple for the likes of Cuthbert. Your clothes are waiting, or rather, your outfit is waiting, because you only have one. A simple tunic, maybe some trousers, made of rough homespun wool. It's probably damp from the morning chill, and it carries the same smoky, earthy scent as the rest of your life. Fashion isn't a concern. Staying warm enough to function is breakfast time. The centerpiece of your humble home is the hearth, an open fire in the middle of the room. There's no chimney, just a hole in the thatched roof to let some of the smoke out. The result is a perpetual, eye-watering haze that coats every surface, including your lungs, with a fine layer of soot. Your wife, who has been up for a while already, hands you the morning's meal. It's a chunk, of course. Dark bread probably made from rye or barley and a bowl of pottage. Pottage was the ever-present all-purpose stew of the medieval peasant. It's whatever vegetables you could grow in your small garden plot boiled. For hours with grains like oats or barley. Sometimes, if you were lucky, there might be a bit of bacon fat for flavor. You wash it down with some watery ale, because the local water is often contaminated and not safe to drink. Even the children drink what was known as small beer, a very low-alcohol version of the same. With that hearty, monotonous meal in your stomach, it's time for work. And work is what your life is all about. As a serf, you are bound to this. Land. You can't leave without the Lord's permission. You can't marry, change your occupation, or even sell your pig without his say-so. You are, for all intents and purposes, part of the property, just like the trees in the river. In exchange for this, security. You get to live on a small strip of land, and in return, you owe your lord labor. This isn't just a 9-to-5 job. During busy seasons like planting or harvesting, your workday starts at sunrise and ends. At sunset, the agrarian calendar dictates your every move. In the spring, it's plowing the fields. The plow is a heavy, clumsy wooden thing pulled by a team of oxen. It's your job to guide it through the thick, unforgiving soil. It's back-breaking, relentless work. Summer brings haymaking and then the harvest, where you'll spend weeks bent over, cutting wheat with a sickle. Autumn is for threshing the grain, sowing winter crops, and slaughtering the excess livestock. You can't afford to feed through the winter. Winter offers a slight reprieve, a time for mending tools, weaving cloth, trying not to freeze. This work isn't just for your own benefit. Several days a week, you are required to work on the Lord's personal land, the domain. This work is unpaid. It's your rent. It's your taxes. It's your obligation. And if the Lord needs a new road built or a forest cleared, you'll be doing that too. On top of that, a portion of everything you grow on your own little strip of land goes to the Lord as well. Another portion, the tithe, goes to the church. What's left is for you and your family to survive on until the next harvest. If the harvest is good, you might just make it. If it's bad, you will face a long, hungry winter. Famine was a constant looming threat, a recurring character in the story of medieval life. The work itself is fraught with peril. A simple cut from a scythe or sickle, in a world without antibiotics or a proper understanding of hygiene, could be a death sentence. Any open wound, exposed to the dirt and grime of the fields, could quickly become infected. Tetanus was a common and fatal outcome of even minor injuries. The physical strain was immense. Skeletal remains from this period show the toll of a life of hard labor. Severe arthritis, chronic back problems, and hernias were the norm. You didn't retire from this work. You just kept going until your body gave out. Let's talk about the food again, because it was one of the central anxieties of your existence. Your diet was incredibly monotonous, out of bread, pottage, ale, day in, day out. Meat was a rarity, reserved for feast days, or when an animal was slaughtered in the fall. Hunting in the Lord's forests was strictly forbidden. Poaching a deer could get you mutilated or executed, so you'd supplement your diet with whatever you could forage: nuts, berries, and maybe the occasional snared rabbit if you were feeling particularly daring. Your small garden might provide some vegetables, onions, cabbages, peas to throw in the pottage pot, but the quality of this food was inconsistent. Grain could be contaminated with fungus like ergot, which grows on rye. Eating bread made from infected grain could lead to a delightful condition called ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire. This poisoning caused hallucinations, seizures, and a horrific burning sensation in the limbs, which could lead to gangrene. Food storage was also a massive challenge. Without refrigeration, you relied on salting, smoking, or drying to preserve meat and fish, but spoilage was common. The line between cured and rotten was often a blurry one. This brings us to the general state of health. Life was short and brutal. Life expectancy was low, with some estimates suggesting that only 1 in 10 adults lived to be 50. Common diseases that we now consider minor, like the flu or diphtheria, were often fatal. Dysentery, typhoid, and smallpox regularly swept through villages. Malaria was endemic in marshy areas. And then there were the skin complaints. Living in close quarters with animals and in generally unsanitary conditions meant that fleas, lice, and mites were your constant companions. This, combined with poor hygiene, led to a host of skin diseases, many of which were simply lumped under the terrifying category of leprosy. If you did get sick, your options were limited. There were no doctors in the village. Your first stop would be the local wise woman, who would offer remedies based on herbs and folk traditions. Some of these might have been genuinely helpful, but many were based on pure superstition. If that failed, you might see a barber surgeon in a nearby town, who could perform bloodletting the go to cure for almost everything, or perhaps a bit of crude surgery, without anesthetic, of course. For the most part, survival was a matter of luck and the strength of your own immune system. The church was the center of village life. It's the one stone building in a world of wood and mud. It marked the passage of time with its bells, and offered the only breaks in the relentless cycle of work. Sundays and holy days were days of rest. But the church also offered a constant reminder of your place in the world. You were taught that your suffering on earth was a test, and that your reward would come in the afterlife. Explained away disease as a punishment from God for sin. It reinforced the social order. The Lord was in his castle, and you were in his field, because that was God's divine plan. It was a powerful tool for keeping a desperate populace in line. You might be miserable, but at least your soul was being saved. Probably. And let's not forget the sheer physical discomfort of it all. Your house was drafty and dark. The floor was dirt. The fire was smoky. In winter, you were perpetually cold and damp. In summer, you were sweltering in the fields under a wool tunic. Your teeth were cleaned by chewing on a twig or rubbing them with a cloth if you bothered at all. The world was also much quieter in some ways. No engine noise, but filled with other sounds. The lowing of oxen, the cry of birds, the constant wind, and it was much, much darker. After sunset, your only light came from the hearth fire, or perhaps a single, precious tallow candle that smelled of rendered animal fat. The social world was tiny. You likely would never travel more than a few miles from the village where you were born. Your entire existence revolved around a few dozen families, the same people you saw every day at church, in the fields, and at the village well. This created a strong sense of community, born of shared hardship, but also a stifling lack of privacy. Everyone knew everyone else's business. Gossip was the primary form of entertainment, right alongside speculating about which of your neighbors was secretly a witch. Justice was swift and often brutal. The lord of the manor was also your judge. If you had a dispute with a neighbor or were accused of a crime, you would be brought before him or his steward in the manor court. Punishments were public and designed to humiliate from being put in. The stocks to be pelted with rotten vegetables, 2 fines that could ruin your family. Stealing from the Lord was the most serious offense, and punishments were severe. Now, let's float away from Cuthbert for a moment and consider the life of his wife. Women's work was just as hard, if not harder. In addition to helping in the fields during peak times like the harvest, her domain was the home. She was responsible for tending the garden, milking the cow, collecting eggs, brewing the ale, baking the bread, spinning wool and weaving cloth, making and mending the family's clothes, and of course, raising the children. And then there was the single most dangerous event in a medieval woman's life, childbirth. In a world without sterile instruments, antibiotics, or an understanding of germs, giving birth was incredibly risky. Around 20% of women died in childbirth. Midwives did their best with traditional knowledge, but complications were often a death sentence for both mother and child. And if the baby survived the birth, its struggles were just beginning. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. Some historians estimate that up to 50% of children died before their first birthday from illness and malnutrition. This meant that women were frequently pregnant, simply to ensure that a few of their offspring would survive to adulthood. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years, each one marked by the same relentless rhythm. Of labor, there was little hope for advancement. A serf was born a serf, and their children would be serfs. The best you could hope for was a good harvest, a mild winter, and a lord who wasn't unusually cruel. It was a life lived on the very edge of survival, where a single stroke of bad luck, a drought, a flood, an illness, a fire could push your family over the precipice into starvation and death. Think about the sheer precariousness of it all. A fire could destroy your home in minutes, as thatched roofs and wooden walls were incredibly flammable. A raid from a neighboring lord's men could see your crops burned and your livestock stolen. There was no safety net, no insurance, no government aid. There was only your family, your neighbors, and your own resilience in the face of a world that seemed at best indifferent to your existence. It wasn't a life of adventure or romance. It was a life of quiet, grinding, unending struggle. A battle waged every single day against hunger, disease, and exhaustion, and the prize for winning, a chance to do it all again tomorrow. Now, let's drift over to the medieval town. You might think that escaping the dreary, mud-soaked life of a serf for the bustling excitement of a town would be a massive upgrade. And in some ways, it was. You were, at least, a freeman. But this freedom came with its own unique and fascinating set of perils. Imagine walking into a medieval city for the first time. The first thing that hits you is the smell. An overwhelming, eye-watering assault on the senses. It's a rich tapestry of human waste, animal dung, rotting garbage, and the smoke from hundreds of workshops and hearths. The streets are narrow, unpaved alleys, choked with mud and filth. There are no sewers. People simply tossed their household waste, including the contents of their chamber pots, directly into the street, maybe with a cursory shout of "Gardaloo," they were feeling considerate. This foul-smelling sludge would then be churned up by the passage of people, carts, and animals. Pigs were often allowed to wander the streets, acting as a sort of primitive and not particularly effective sanitation department. The second thing you'd notice is the noise. The constant din of craftsmen at work, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the rasp of the carpenter's saw, the shouts of merchants hawking their wares. Church bells would ring out the hours, and the rumble of wooden cartwheels over cobblestones, where they existed, would be ever present. It was a chaotic, crowded, and vibrant place. Homes were packed tightly together, often built of timber and plaster. Fire was an even greater danger here than in the village. With houses leaning against each other, a single stray spark from a baker's oven or a blacksmith's forge could ignite a blaze that would sweep through entire neighborhoods in a matter of hours. And while the town offered opportunities for work as a craftsman or a merchant, it also concentrated people in close quarters, creating the perfect breeding ground for disease. With contaminated water, sources rivers were often used for both drinking water and waste. Disposal-land streets filled with filth, outbreaks of dysentery, and typhoid were common. The sheer density of the population meant that any contagious illness could spread like wildfire. This is why cities were often hit hardest by waves of plague, like the Black Death, which could wipe out a huge percentage of the population in a terrifyingly short time. Let's talk about your job in this medieval metropolis. Perhaps you're an apprentice learning a trade like carpentry or metalworking. Your days are long, your pay is non-existent, and you live with your master subject to his rules and his temper. Workplaces were not models of safety. A carpenter could lose a finger to a saw, a stonemason could be crushed by a falling block, and a tanner had to work with foul-smelling and caustic materials all day long. There was no workers' compensation, no disability insurance. An injury that prevented you from working could easily lead to destitution. The food in town was more varied than in the countryside, but not necessarily safer. You could buy prepared food from street vendors and cook shops, but its quality was always a gamble. Without regulations on food safety, meat could be days old. Bread could be cut with cheaper ingredients like sawdust, and wine could be watered down or spiced to hide the fact that it had gone sour. Food poisoning was a constant risk. Even just walking around the city had its dangers. The streets were poorly lit at night, making them the perfect territory for robbers and cutthroats. And the administration of justice, while no longer in the hands of a single lord, was still a brutal affair. Public executions, whippings, and stints in the pillory were common forms of entertainment, and a stark warning to anyone considering a life of crime. Now, let's step back and consider the medieval mindset, the psychological landscape that all this peril created. This was a world steeped in superstition. Without a scientific understanding of the world, people explained events through the lens of faith and folklore. Crop failure wasn't due to poor weather. It was a punishment from God. A sudden illness wasn't caused by bacteria. It was the result of a curse from a jealous neighbor, or perhaps the malevolent influence of fairies or demons. This belief system created a pervasive sense of anxiety. Dangers lurked everywhere, not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual one as well. People wore charms and amulets to ward off evil spirits. They performed rituals to ensure a good harvest or a healthy child. The fear of witchcraft was very real, and an accusation, often born of simple village squabbles, could have deadly consequences. Let's return to the body for a moment. Medieval people had a much different relationship with pain and discomfort than we do. It was simply an accepted part of life. A toothache was something to be endured, perhaps treated by having the tooth pulled by a barber surgeon without anesthetic. Chronic aches from a lifetime of labor were the norm. The remedies for these pains were often worse than the ailment itself, involving potions with questionable ingredients or painful procedures like cauterization. And what about the end of life? If you managed to survive the gauntlet of childhood diseases, famine, workplace accidents, and plague, you might reach what was considered old age, perhaps your 50s or early 60s, but it was not a gentle decline. Years of hard labor and poor nutrition would have taken their toll. You would likely be stooped and stiff with few of your own teeth left. Dying a good death was incredibly important. This meant dying in your own bed, surrounded by family, having received the last rites from the priest. A sudden death from an accident in a battle or from a swift illness was feared, as it left no time to prepare one's soul for the journey to the afterlife. The final moments were a communal affair, a public ritual to ensure the dying person was ready to meet their maker. So, from the moment of birth to the final breath, life in the Middle Ages was a tightrope walk over a chasm of constant peril. Every day was a collection of small victories: surviving the night, finding enough food to eat, finishing your work without a serious injury, and watching the sun go down on your family, still intact. It's easy for us from our comfortable vantage point to romanticize this period, to think of castles and quests and chivalry. But for the vast majority of people, for the Cuthberts and their families who made up the backbone of this world, life was a far more humble and hazardous affair. It was a world where the greatest luxuries were a warm fire, a full belly, and the simple, profound relief of having survived another day. It was a life lived on a knife's edge, a testament to the quiet, dogged resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming hardship. And as you drift off to sleep in your warm, safe bed, perhaps spare a thought for those who lived and died in that distant, difficult world. A world where the line between life and death was perilously and permanently. Then let the quiet rhythm of their world lull you into a deep and restful sleep. Let go of the day and just float on the gentle tide of history. There are no dangers here for you, just the soft darkness and the steady, peaceful cadence of your own breath. Rest well.